Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Kyle Ward wasn't your average delivery guy. Sure, he dealt with annoying customers and traffic like every other person in the gig economy, but his traffic was more interstellar than freeway, and his customers, well, they ranged from shape-shifting aliens to multi-eyed space creatures with far too many dietary restrictions. On any given day, he could be racing through asteroid fields, dodging black holes, or arguing with a holographic menu system that refused to give him directions in anything other than Zoglarian. Today, though, was supposed to be easy. Just another run to Oceania 7, a gorgeous oceanic planet famous for its seafood and coral reefs. His task? Deliver a luxury seafood platter to the Brookins, one of the most sophisticated aquatic species in the galaxy. Easy money, he thought. Warning, reef detected. Depth unstable. The automated voice of his delivery pod chimed as Kyle flicked the switches to descent. He sighed, pushing a hand through his messy brown hair and glancing at the display. Yeah, I know, but unless you can make this seafood platter swim, we've got a job to do. The pod continued its descent into the water, the blue hues of Oceania 7's massive ocean illuminating the interior of the cockpit. Kyle peered out of the window, watching the endless expanse of coral structures rise below him. I swear, one day I'll deliver something on a planet with dry land. One day. Suddenly, a jolt shook the pod as it drifted off course, the bright display flashing red warnings across his screen. Impact detected. Propulsion damaged. Oh, you've gotta be kidding me, Kyle groaned. A quick glance out the side confirmed his worst suspicion. One of the pod's stabilizers had clipped an unusually large coral reef. Just as he was about to reach for the manual override, something hit the pod hard. Kyle shot a glance out the window and felt his stomach drop. A massive alien fish. No, it was more like a shark, only with 6 fins and pulsating purple scales circled the pod. Its eyes, yellow and glowing, zeroed in on Kyle. Great ocean predators. Why did it always have to be predators? The shark thing rammed the pod again, this time harder. Kyle's screen flickered, then went black. He could feel the pod tipping sideways, sinking toward the coral below. All right, Kyle muttered to himself, time to earn that dip. He unbuckled his seatbelt and scrambled toward the back of the pod. The seafood platter wrapped carefully in a hoverstasis unit was still intact. He grabbed it, strapping it to his back before pulling on his aquatic suit. With a quick breath, he shoved open the pod's emergency hatch and swam out, his legs kicking furiously. The water was thick, heavy with minerals, making every movement feel like he was pushing against the wall. The alien shark was circling again, slower now, as if sizing him up. Kyle cursed under his breath. Of all the places to get stranded, why did it have to be here? But there wasn't time to panic. The Brookins were expecting their food within the hour, and even if Kyle was stuck fending off sea monsters, he wasn't about to lose his perfect delivery record. He spotted a narrow pathway between 2 looming coral structures and swam toward it, hoping the shark wouldn't follow. As he reached the crevice, Kyle's helmet display blinked with a message. Incoming message, Brookin representative. Deliverer Ward, are you still on schedule? The voice was monotone, with a clicking sound that resembled bubbles popping underwater. The Brookin elders are most displeased with delays. Kyle gritted his teeth and tapped his helmet. Everything's fine, just a slight detour. I'll be there before you know it. There was a pause, then the voice replied, we expect nothing less. The communication ended, leaving Kyle floating in silence again. He checked the food is still fresh. The seafood platter might make it, but Kyle wasn't so sure about himself. He turned a corner, hoping for an open stretch of water, but was met with another problem: alien sea creatures. This time, a school of glowing eels, their bodies crackling with blue energy, blocked his path. Kyle swore under his breath. Out of the frying pan and into the electric eel den, he muttered. There was no way around them, and as he approached, they swarmed closer, their electric pulses lighting up the water. Kyle activated his suit's emergency shield, praying it would hold long enough for him to slip past. The eels hissed and crackled against the shield, the water vibrating with their energy, but Kyle powered through, his heart racing as he felt the shield's charge rapidly depleting. Just as he thought he couldn't take another second, the eels scattered. He had made it through. His shield sputtered and died, but he was clear. For now. All right, Ward, you got this, Kyle told himself, kicking his legs harder. He spotted the glowing lights of the broken city just ahead, its towering coral spires rising from the ocean floor. Relief washed over him. But as he approached the city's entrance, a pair of broken sentries floated out to meet him, their bodies sleek and covered in translucent fins. They regarded him with large, unblinking eyes. "Deliverer Ward," one of them said, its voice echoing through the water, "you're late." Kyle forced a grin. "Hey, technical difficulties, you know?" But the food's still fresh. He pulled the hover stasis unit from his back and presented the seafood platter. Bon appetit. Copyright it. The sentries inspected the food, their long, slender fingers poking at the container. After a moment, they nodded. "The elders will be pleased. You may proceed." Kyle sighed in relief, his body finally relaxing as he followed the sentries into the city. The broken capital was a breathtaking sight, with bioluminescent coral lighting the streets and strange, otherworldly creatures floating peacefully through the water. But Kyle didn't have time to enjoy the view. He handed off the platter to the head of the Brucan Council and quickly made his exit. As he reached the surface, his comm unit beeped again. "New delivery request, Zetharian." Kyle groaned. "Anti-gravity." "Fantastic." Kyle's pod zoomed through the black void of space, heading towards Zetharian, a small planet with zero gravity and notoriously picky customers. He had delivered here before, and it was always a nightmare. This time, the order was for a multi-course meal meant for a high society diplomatic event. Of course it was. As he neared the planet, the lack of gravity became apparent. The pod began to float freely, spinning slightly as it crossed the planet's orbit. Kyle grabbed onto the controls, studying the ship before setting it into hover mode. "All right, just get in, deliver the food, and get out," he muttered to himself. How hard could it be? He unbuckled, grabbed the food, and pushed open the pod hatch. Instantly, everything inside the pod began to float: the cutlery, napkins, even his drink. Kyle cursed and quickly stuffed the floating objects into his bag. Zero gravity, a broken bar. What could possibly go wrong? Outside, Zetharian was a mess of floating buildings and drifting debris. Kyle made his way toward the designated coordinates, his food container awkwardly floating behind him on a tether. As he approached the banquet hall, he realized the guests were already gathering, their bodies floating freely in the zero-gravity space, dressed in elaborate, shimmering gowns and robes that defied physics. The event seemed to be some kind of formal affair, though Kyle couldn't help but notice the oddity of it all. Every so often, a guest would drift too far, accidentally bumping into someone else or knocking over a floating table. It was like a slow-motion disaster, and Kyle was supposed to deliver food to these people? Great, he muttered under his breath as he floated toward the head of the banquet. The diplomat, a tall alien with multiple glowing eyes, floated lazily in the center of the hall, surrounded by other dignitaries. "Ah, the food," the diplomat said, its voice slow and deliberate. "We were wondering when you would arrive." Kyle flashed a strained smile. "Right on time," he lied, holding out the food container. "The finest cuisine the galaxy has to offer." The diplomat reached out to take the container, but before it could grab it, the food began to drift away. Kyle lunged for it, but it was too late. The container floated lazily across the room, spinning in circles as it went. The dignitaries gasped in horror as their dinner slowly made its way toward the ceiling. Kyle cursed and launched himself after it, his arms flailing as he tried to grab the spinning container. Just as it was about to disappear into the abyss, Kyle caught it by the edge and pulled it back down. "Got it," he said breathlessly, securing the container with a magnetic tether. The diplomat eyed him suspiciously, but Kyle quickly opened the container and presented the food. "All in one piece," he said with a grin. The diplomat stared at Kyle for a moment, its many glowing eyes blinking slowly in unison, before finally nodding in approval. "Very well, the event shall proceed as planned," it said, gesturing toward the floating guests. Kyle let out a silent breath of relief, glad that his delivery hadn't ended in a complete disaster. He hovered back toward the exit, watching as the guests began to gather around the diplomat and the food, eagerly drifting toward the floating banquet table. Just as Kyle was about to make his escape, a voice came through his earpiece again. "New delivery request, Galactic 829. Kyle stopped in his tracks. Galactic 829 was infamous for its thin atmosphere and unpredictable weather. Delivering food there was less of a job and more of a suicide mission. He had only been there once, and it hadn't been a pleasant experience. But the pay was good, really good. He sighed, knowing he couldn't resist the payout. "All right, let's get this over with," Kyle muttered to himself as he floated back to his pod. He quickly set the coordinates for Galactic 829 and launched himself into space once more, the black void swallowing him as the stars streaked by outside the cockpit. The journey to Galactic 829 was uneventful, and soon enough, Kyle was orbiting the thin, barren planet. From his view in the pod, he could see the jagged mountain ranges that covered the planet's surface, as well as the sparse patches of vegetation that managed to survive in the harsh conditions. Kyle strapped on his spacesuit, double-checking his oxygen levels before grabbing the pizza he was supposed to deliver. "Galactic 829, Kyle said with a smirk. "One pizza. Let's hope this one stays warm." He opened the hatch and stepped out into the planet's thin atmosphere, immediately feeling the weightlessness of the low gravity. He activated the thrusters on his suit, sending him gently gliding toward the delivery coordinates. It wasn't long before he spotted the customer's home, or at least what passed for a home on this planet. It was more like a metallic dome, half buried in the rocky terrain. He tapped on his wristpad, sending a signal to the customer to let them know he was outside. As he hovered near the entrance, the door slid open with a hiss, revealing an alien that could only be described as a sentient pile of moss with arms and legs. "Kyle Ward, intergalactic delivery," Kyle said, holding up the pizza with a smile behind his helmet. The mossy alien blinked well. It didn't really have eyes, but Kyle liked to think it blinked and reached out with a slimy, green arm to take the pizza. As soon as the alien took the box, Kyle's suit beeped with an emergency alert. His oxygen levels were dropping fast. He glanced at the display on his wrist, eyes widening as he realized his oxygen tank had malfunctioned. Enjoy your meal," Kyle said hastily, giving a half salute before turning and boosting away as fast as he could. His breaths were coming in short, shallow gasps, and he could feel his lungs starting to burn from the lack of air. The pod was only a few hundred meters away, but in the thin atmosphere, it felt like a lifetime. His vision was starting to blur by the time he finally reached the pod and slammed the door shut behind him. He yanked off his helmet, gulping in lungfuls of the pod's recycled air. He leaned back in the seat, wiping the sweat from his brow. "That was a broken bar way too close," Kyle panted, his heart still racing from the near-death experience. He stared out the window, watching as the barren landscape of Galactic 829 shrank in the distance. But before he could even catch his breath, his earpiece chimed again. "New delivery request, Granos 9. Kyle's heart sank. Granos 9 was worse than any of the planets he'd delivered to before. The planet was notorious for its erratic time flow. Delivering food there wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible. Time moved differently depending on where you were on the planet. 1 minute could stretch into days, or hours could pass in what felt like seconds. Kyle sighed. "Of course it's Granos 9, he muttered, setting the coordinates on his pod's console. Why wouldn't it be? The trip to Granos 9 was shorter than expected, which Kyle chalked up to the planet's strange time distortion field. As he entered the atmosphere, the scenery below shifted and warped, as if time itself was flowing like liquid. Entire forests grew and withered in the blink of an eye, while mountains seemed to erode and rebuild themselves in seconds. It was disorienting, to say the least. Kyle set the pod to hover mode and grabbed the delivery, a simple meal for a private client. The instructions were vague, which only made him more nervous. He stepped out of the pod, his boots sinking into the strange, shifting soil. His wristpad beeped, showing the delivery coordinates, but the numbers were flickering as if struggling to keep up with the planet's time fluctuations. "Great," Kyle muttered, making his way through the warped landscape. Every step felt strange, like he was walking through syrup, and the trees around him flickered in and out of existence. He checked his wristpad again and saw a message flash across the screen: "Beware, time anomalies." "No kidding," Kyle said, his voice laced with sarcasm. As he approached the client's home, a modest-looking house nestled in a patch of rapidly growing and dying flowers, Kyle suddenly froze. He wasn't alone. A figure stood in the doorway, watching him. It was a broken Barham, a future version of himself, judging by the slightly worn suit and tired eyes. "Hey, future me," Kyle said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You here to give me a heads up or something?" The future Kyle nodded slowly. "Don't drop the delivery," he said, his voice low and serious. "You'll be tempted, but don't do it. Trust me." Before Kyle could respond, the future version of himself flickered and disappeared, leaving Kyle standing alone, his heart pounding. What kind of planet was this? Shaking his head, Kyle continued toward the house. He rang the doorbell, if it could even be called that, and waited. The door slid open, revealing a strange, floating creature with multiple eyes and tentacles that shifted in and out of existence as time distorted around it. "Your delivery," Kyle said, holding out the meal. The creature eyed Hema, or rather, its eyes floated around Hema and accepted the food. Kyle was about to turn and leave when he felt a sudden tug at the back of his mind. A strange urge to drop the delivery bag and run. But he remembered what his future self had said. "Don't drop the delivery." He fought the impulse, holding on tight to the bag as the creature floated back inside. The moment the door closed, Kyle felt the time distortion around him fade, and everything snapped back into focus. The house, the flowers, even the sky above it all seemed normal again. Kyle let out a long breath, his heart still racing from the strange encounter. He turned and headed back to his pod, feeling like he'd just survived a cosmic prank. As he climbed into the cockpit, his wristpad beeped once more. "New delivery request. Volcana Prime." Kyle groaned. A volcanic planet, of course. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head as he set the coordinates. Just another day in the life of a galactic delivery guy. And with that, he launched the pod into space, ready for whatever ridiculous challenge awaited him next.